Hello and welcome to the Auditing Antics podcast. So, we just got to put this disclaimer out there. Michele and I are really feeling it today. And we had to give each other a speech before we started this episode about not triggering one or the other to lose it and laugh and just go off the rails. So, let's just hope we can stay composed and talk about what we're going to talk about today.
The antics may come out a little bit more than normal.
Yes. Yeah, we're going to try our best. Now, really quick before we jump in, I just want to announce quick. So next week, there is a webinar event related to the vascular system and lower extremity coding and interventions. Terry Fletcher and I, we collaborate and we do different webinar events each month. And that does, if you attend the live event, there is a CEU with that. I know I've had a lot of people asking me about the vascular side. I do not do vascular procedures. That's one specialty I have not dove into. Yeah.
A big no.
Outside of like varicose veins and all of that, I do not do vascular. So yeah. If it's something that you are needing that extra support in, you need to understand the new codes. I know they've had a complete overhaul. Again, I just am not in those. I'm not working with those code sets, but that is an area that Terry does specialize in.
And that's why we love Terry.
Yes. And I'm not even going to participate in that one. I'm not going to pretend that I know what I'm doing. Terry's going to do an awesome job. So if you are needing some additional help and want some education related to the new vascular codes, you can go to stephanieallardconsulting.com/webinar events. And we do have a discount code. If you use VASC15, that'll save 15% on checkout. So check that out if you need help with vascular. All right, so Michele, I'll let you start and we'll jump right in.
All right. Well, today we are going to be talking about everyone's favorite phrase. We've always done it this way. I'm sure that everybody who is watching this has received that as an answer to why something's being built the way it's built, why a workflow is the way it is. We've always done it this way. I don't know about you, Stephanie, but when I hear that, it kind of makes like the hairs on the back of my neck stand, like you get that like, and I think we can both agree that the reason it is so concerning is because usually that means no one remembers why that process started. So that also means nobody has taken the time to reevaluate it, and no one has, checked to make sure that it aligns with current guidelines. So basically it tells you they have no clue. It just hasn't blown up yet.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a problem that exists but just hasn't been put out in the forefront. So when this happens, that's where these small compliance issues start to become normalized. And it's these small, I know we had talked about the word deviate, but like deviations from policy that happen once, and then it's like nothing bad happens. So it happens again and again and again. And eventually it just starts feeling like workflow. It's not even about policy. It just becomes part of the workflow. And it doesn't start to break down until somebody actually looks at it, until somebody audits it. And then all of a sudden, something that was normal for your practice is non-compliant. And I think that is the biggest danger behind we've always done it this way. Never accept that as an answer. If you are somebody working as a coder and you're new to this industry, never accept that as an answer, because that should be your first red flag that the person who's telling you that doesn't know why. And so you need to go find why.
So, Michelle, when you talk about this, I always laugh about a situation where you were in your first position, and we've talked about it. In the background, I've always been there mentoring Michelle,
Yes.
all of the positions she's had. But there was one day that you call me and you're like, well, I asked for the reason. I asked for them to talk about the source and, give me the reason behind the answer. And the person had gone to a file cabinet and pulled out a CMS policy that had been printed 15 years prior. And it was just, okay, let's not ask internally. That's the answer you're getting.
That's also the person who said, "Can't you just trust my years of experience?" No. You mean the dust that just flew out of your file? Holy
Exactly.
cow.
Well,
Uh,
and I think the way that you describe that as far as that deviation from that policy,
yes.
it makes sense because when you're internal, it doesn't feel like this big change, right?
No,
It just
no.
feels like, oh, this could go two ways and I'm just giving deference to the provider. What's wrong with that?
Yeah.
And when we think about it, those little steps or the little decisions to make things go or the little assumptions we always talk about, we're not to be assuming anything for our providers. And when we come in and do external audits, there's so many times where we find something and we're like, we don't, or I should say, we don't find something, meaning the documentation doesn't support a service. And we'll say, why is this happening? And then the staff or whoever we're communicating with knows all about the clinical workflow, but that's not being seen in
Yeah.
documentation. But they've made that deviation to allow it to go forward. And they think, oh, well, we know they're doing it, so it's got to be appropriate per the policy or whatever it may be. But I don't feel like these types of things that happen are typically done with intent,
No,
meaning
not at
that it's
all.
not like a group got together and they were like, oh, well, we don't want to, give so and so a hard time, so we're going to interpret that this way so that we can just move along. It's not this big decision that's been made.
Yeah, it's often something that happens quietly and goes unnoticed. And that's why it's really important to get, which we'll talk about this later on as well, that outside feedback. And as you know, one of my biggest pet peeves, I hope they can't hear my fan that I have blowing. I just turned it off. Okay.
Mm-mm.
um it's shoot, what was I thinking about? Here we go,
A pet
folks.
peeve, a pet peeve.
A pet peeve. I don't even remember what my pet peeve was. Um, but yeah, I have a pet peeve and it's going to come to me probably in the middle of the night, but completely forgot it now. So let's move on. See, folks, we're really winning. This week has been one of those weeks where um anything that can go wrong has gone wrong, and we've got to turn it around. Like, this
Hmm.
is just unacceptable.
Yeah, midweek we can finish out the week well.
So let's just move on because Michelle has mysterious pet peeves, and let's talk about some of the places we notice this. And
Hmm.
um I think they're areas that we identify as issues, but maybe people don't realize this normalization of deviation from policy has caused such a compliance issue in these areas.
Or they
Um,
do realize it and they make an
true,
excuse for it to
true.
continue. It
I
happens
mean,
in two ways.
we hear it all the time when, you get feedback on an audit you've done and you've met with the practice manager or, the compliance individuals who are your contact for this project, and they're like, "Oh, well, we don't want to upset so and so," or Well, really, it could go either way. So because it's easier and it's nicer, we do it this way, or they're just completely unwilling to hear the fact that what they're doing is 100% wrong.
Right.
And I think the first perfect example for us to look at is incident two. And
Mhm.
this is a topic that I think people have a lot of differing opinions on. I think you could agree with that. Some are for incident to billing, some think it should not exist. I am in the camp of why do it at all, because
Mhm.
nobody does it right. I would I would rejoice if I had an audit where incident 2 was being done correctly. I don't think I've had one. Have you?
Mm, no, no. I've not, and some people will argue, okay, well, 80% of the time it's usually done. But we're speaking from our perspective and what we see in the audit work we do. And it's funny that you bring up incident two because I've had two different sessions where these practices were considering doing incident two, and these one was last week, one was this week. And we had an hour-long session with the physicians and practitioners to just hash it all out and say, okay, what would this look like? And in each situation, I was just happy that they wanted to figure this out before they started,
Exactly.
because I will talk to people where I always bring this up in a discovery call before I even send a proposal over to somebody. If we're talking about a potential of moving forward with an audit project, I want to know if incident 2 or split shared is being done. And people will say, well, we do that, but we don't want that to be a part of the audit because we will not change it because we're not going to lose that revenue. And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, I don't know why we're talking, because that's not something that you can just carve out and ignore in a compliance audit.
Not at all. And so just to back it up a little so that we can kind of preface how these things start to fall apart as time goes on, let's talk a little bit about what are the requirements for
Mhm.
incident 2. So we know that it is mainly a Medicare rule, so we should acknowledge that. But there has to be an established plan of care. So that means the physician has to see that patient and develop the plan of care that is going to be carried out by the
Mhm.
APPs, essentially. There has to be direct supervision, which we know now that they are changing the definition of direct supervision and what that looks like. So that adds just like even another layer of possibility for non-compliance because
And that, let me clarify that quick. So, what Michelle's referring to is, so direct supervision, we still have the same definition, but they've added direct
yes,
virtual supervision, which we'll probably do a separate episode on that, because that is
yeah,
a beast and it's a mess and we're already seeing compliance issues.
it
Um, yeah.
absolutely. It's extremely concerning. And then the physician has to remain actively involved in the patient treatment. And I think this one is a little bit gray because they don't really define for us what actively involved means. But I think we can apply some common sense to know where what that means for them to be actively involved. So as long as those requirements are met, you are in the clear, you are compliant. However, this is where the deviations start.
Mhm.
We see APPs beginning to address new problems because how often do people come to the doctor and say everything is great and we just continue everything, whether they stubbed their toe,
Mhm.
something has happened, have a mysterious bruise, or they have postnasal drip. It doesn't matter what specialty you are, any new problem being addressed without direct involvement from the physician takes us out of incident to immediately. But we see it all the time where it's being billed incident two with new problems addressed. We see where medications are being adjusted,
Mhm.
ordering new diagnostics. And even sometimes I've looked and they haven't even seen a physician in the past 3 years, like something
Yeah, that's
ridiculous.
something I was gonna say. So when I do audits like this or anything where it could be a situation where there's a policy that should be there internally, because even with the information we have on incident two, there's still different sections of that that people can misinterpret. And that's where we
Yes.
end up with a lot of issues. But when I'm doing those types of reviews, I like to be in the EMR system if I
Mhm,
can, so I can further question that clinical workflow. So, to your point with seeing a physician, sometimes I will audit inside of an EMR. And I remember with one particular large multi specialty outpatient group, there would be all kinds of incident to billing happening, and I go in
mhm,
and take a look, and a PA has seen the patient for the last 3 years with
mhm,
no physician. But there will be things like collaborating conversations and supervisory type work, and they think that that's fulfilling
mhm,
the requirements when it's not. But that's also an example. So when we talk about this deviation, it's an example of where we have misinterpretation happening from the clinical perspective
mhm,
because we need to bridge that gap. But then we may also have people on the administrative side who aren't even a part of the revenue or compliance team who just kind of let things happen. And,
yes.
we've talked about that before, the culture of an organization. And, you know, I, I don't like always referring to these things because I don't want to seem negative towards physicians,
Yeah,
because obviously the majority of what I do in my career is working at supporting physicians, defending physicians. So it's a large part of what I do and what I believe in this industry. But we can tell the difference when we come into an organization that allows physicians to make all decisions with
mhm,
no input whatsoever from a compliance standpoint.
yeah,
And when organizations are run that way, there's more opportunity for deviation to happen because people want, to your point earlier, Michelle, people want to make other people feel comfortable.
yeah,
Or
and
we don't want
it's
to threaten or, say the
it's
wrong thing.
it's not about comfort, and I truly believe that you can have these conversations and say the things that need to be said in a productive manner. Even if somebody who is part of that conversation is not invested in it being productive, you can still have a productive, meaningful conversation with your word choices, and even recognizing when it's time to end that conversation with that individual and take it elsewhere. Get
Yeah.
other players involved, get the people above that provider involved. And like you said, I think it's kind of lost in this industry that we're their partner. We're part of the
Mhm.
team. We are just as invested in you getting paid for the work you do and getting paid correctly for the work that you do, because if you don't get paid, I don't get paid.
Mhm.
But also at the end of the day, I also think about our patients and how they're impacted by these compliance breakdowns that happen. And how those things, we see this in the compliance workflow. Where are these other breakdowns happening? Are there other issues that are taking place within that patient's experience, not just the billing portion of it,
Mhm.
that need to be looked at, and conversations need to be had as well, because somebody doesn't want to be uncomfortable.
Right.
Well, I hate to tell you, I am not going to be made to feel uncomfortable. you know, you can be uncomfortable. It's totally unnecessary, but I'm not going to be, just because I'm trying to show you how to correctly bill for the services that you're providing.
Yeah.
But
Well, and
I
it's
think
it's better for us to be the ones to provide that message as opposed to coming in and trying to work on the
yes.
defense side. And that's one thing I try to highlight too,
Absolutely.
because I have really hard conversations a lot. I have a client I'm currently working with, and as a part of the review, we have found that the entire clinical workflow of the practice is incorrect. So it's going to
Yeah.
interrupt what the providers are doing. It even causes us to question the overall staffing. So to
Mhm.
correct this, we've got to talk through that bridge between clinical and compliance and billing and
Mhm.
relook at that entire structure of the organization. So it's better for us to be doing this now and working alongside
Mhm.
you as a partner than someone else coming in and finding that. But even when these types of things happen, Michelle, this is exactly when the phrase, the topic of the day today, it's paid, so why can't I do it?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that's what I hear when I have these conversations. This is paid. What does everybody in the industry do? I
Yeah.
think some of it comes along with a shock component. It's like, wow, I can't believe you're saying this.
Mhm.
It's paying. Why would you tell me? Like with incident two,
I
going
know.
back to that, all of those claims are paying, but we also have to look at what the audit triggers are in the industry. And
Exactly.
if you think about incident two, there's so many charges going out under somebody's NPI number. And I've had situations where I see one practitioner who wants to bill for all these things, but there's different addresses. They may be a part of one entity, but there's 3 locations with 2 PAs at each location,
Mhm.
and that physician has their own schedule.
Yeah.
So those things are pretty easy to find, like we've talked about in past
Yep.
episodes.
Yeah. And I think that's something really important to keep in mind when it comes to, but it's always paid, is payment history does not mean validation. It
Mhm,
just means that it got through the first round of checks.
mhm,
Usually, no human eyes have looked at your documentation unless a documentation request has taken place. So, to say it's always been paid shows how little you understand about that payment process and the actual compliance process. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It just shows that you need our help. And that's why we're
mhm,
there. We're not there to criticize you or talk down to people. We're there to help you and work as a team. And
mhm.
if everybody could just get along,
Yes.
it would
Unfortunately,
make
yes.
our life a lot easier. No prima donnas, no time for prima donnas. Um, we can, do you ever watch, speaking, this is off topic, do you ever watch those videos? I think he's an ophthalmologist, but he like impersonates, he created like characters based on how he perceives the personalities of different specialists, like the pediatrician
Yes.
wears the unicorn headband, and orthopedics is like, the big tough guys. Well,
Yeah.
um I think of him when I see these different specialties like plastic surgery.
Mhm.
Yeah, things like that. Your
Yeah.
specialty, um,
The
not the
norms within the
case.
specialty.
Yes,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't, it's like Flacken or something weird, Dr.
Yeah.
Glaucoma Flacken or something like that, but they're hilarious. And
They
he
are.
is so spot on, and he gives also a really good perspective to the clinical side of things.
Yeah.
But, um, message of the day, everybody just needs to get along.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and when we think
And
about situations of, okay, a claim has paid, my friends are doing it down the road. Why are you telling me I can't do it? You know, I think we're about to see a shift in the industry, because if you look at what the current administration is doing
mhm,
and the way that they're talking about, they're calling out the current pay and chase model. And
They
that's
are.
what we've lived under. And that's why everybody has felt that they're under a radar, which
Mhm.
does not exist. That's not a thing. So with this pay and chase model, with CMS now looking and saying, okay, we're going to start asking for more records before we pay a claim, that's not the kind of behavior we typically would see coming from CMS. We would expect
Mhm.
that from commercial payers because they've done that for a long time. It still doesn't stop things. A lot of stuff still gets through, but I'm just curious to see if some of this is going to shift as we go into the future with
Mhm.
technology and with a different viewpoint on the payer side.
I agree 100%. And this is not the time to be prioritizing workflow over policy by any means, because I think a lot of times when things like this start to happen, it's because they're trying to improve the workflow. How can we shift this so each doctor can see two more patients each day, or maximize reimbursement here, maximize reimbursement there? And we have to remember that you cannot violate policy for the benefit of your workflow.
Mhm. Well, and so when we think about everything related to this pattern we've been talking about, where people are getting comfortable, and also, not even just comfort. If you think about a busy practice, there is so much going on. And,
Yes.
we do need to recognize the fact that whenever we talk about compliance, obviously that's our focus, that's what we do.
Mhm.
But when we think about a provider, how many times do we say they didn't go to medical school so they could come out and listen to you and I talk about their audits and how to document and how to get paid?
Mhm.
And that's the necessary evil of the industry. And that's where we have a lot of, issues in the industry. The whole payment model is
Yeah.
just toxic and an issue. But there's
Yeah.
there's not anything we can do to fix that. So what we need
No.
to do is we need to go down to our level, look at all of the different players. Again, it depends. We talk about these things, we give suggestions. I really hope that you work within an organization where these types of things are acceptable, meaning having conversations. I know that sounds crazy, but I also know a lot of people don't feel like they'll be heard. They get pushed away in the busyness of the day. If it's too disruptive, nobody wants to address it because there's other
Mhm.
things going on. So, when we think about all of these different patterns, what are some of the things that a department could do? So, if we look at coding, or if there's no
Mhm.
coders, if we look at a billing team, what are some of these things they can do to break it down where they start to add some, I'm going to use the word variety. I don't know if that's the right word, but mix it up a little bit so that
Yeah.
people aren't getting so complacent in the monotony that comes along with a lot of our positions as well.
Exactly. So, some things that come to my mind when I think of how can we shift this mindset. I think about why were these things missed in the first place? Because it's not always like we had talked about. It's not always intentional. It's something that happens slowly without notice. So we have to disrupt our comfort level. We have to be willing to accept and take that input that something we've been doing is not correct. um, Maybe when you have a new staff member, that's a good time to take a look at why you're doing things the way you're doing things, because you're going to be teaching somebody how to do that. And a lot of times, that fresh pair of eyes, whether they have experience or not, can be so valuable in pointing out these inconsistencies. Just because somebody is fresh out of their exam, taking their CPC exam, doesn't mean that they can't point out something that may be done incorrectly. I think that a lot of times, that newness, I don't know, is not given credibility where credibility is due,
Mhm.
where it's a fresh set of eyes. The lack of auditing, so you need to start doing internal auditing, not only on your providers. You need to do it on your coding staff. You need to be auditing your billing staff as well as your staff who are working claims if you have a separate department. I know a lot of larger organizations have like a whole insurance department where they're working the denials. You have to have eyes on that as compliance professionals. You need to question, be willing to question long-standing employees. If your staff has been
That's a
in
big
that
hurdle.
position, if your staff has been in that position and you go to them and you say, Jane. Now, if your name is Jane and you're a long-standing employee, my apologies, but I had to pick a name, okay? You know, why do you put the 59 modifier on this code? Explain to me why you used the 59 modifier. Hopefully Jane can give you an answer that's
And
correct.
maybe don't ask that in a group setting, please.
Correct. Correct. And
Don't put
also
people on the spot.
I hate it when people do that. But also, we need to put less pressure on productivity and we need to give people the opportunity to take that pause for compliance. I think that there is a lot of productivity pressure on coders to the point where certain things aren't even being looked at. So a wildly inaccurate billing goes out the door, like billing for something that didn't even happen in the note. And when it
Mhm.
comes down to it and you ask the person, they're like, gosh, I don't know why. It's because they didn't look at it because they have this quota of, 300 encounters coded a day. I don't know. I haven't been
Some
in
do.
that
Some
level of
have that. Yeah.
productivity in so long. I mean, I worked in an environment where we had to code 10 charts an hour and the level of errors I was hearing about was wild. It was
Mhm.
like, how is this missed? So I think the big takeaway from that is the longer that something goes unquestioned, that's when it becomes harder to question. So
Mhm.
you have to make the change where things are being looked at regularly. If you don't have coding policies in place, put them in place. If you have coding policies, dust off the binder, whatever the heck it is. If it is a binder, it's probably time to revamp and put
Yeah.
an
Electronic.
electronic file. Um, you know, take a look at it because these can when audits happen externally or by the payer, these can start to open the door for them to start looking in so many other areas. And I think that's what is sometimes missed. Like, okay, this incident two, for example, it's not just a $20 mistake. That's 15% reimbursement that you're receiving. And if you multiply that over years, it just
Mhm.
becomes this, avalanche effect where the snowball starts rolling down the hill and here we go, more and more and more and more and more incorrect payment was received. Um, so, how I know we talked about like what are some things you can do, but what are some recommendations that you have, Stephanie, on how they can change these patterns or how somebody, you've always been really good at helping me know how to speak up and make my voice heard. So maybe speak to that a little, maybe Jane is here listening
Yes. Poor Jane. Sorry, Jane.
and and Jane has noticed that they are not doing things correctly. Maybe Jane works for an orthopedics office and their x-rays are a mess. So what would your advice be to Jane on how to how to communicate this and how to follow up on it in a way that
Well,
fixes the
I think
problem?
one of the important things, so if we look at it from two different perspectives, so let's look at it from Jane's, but then let's also look at it from the perspective of the leadership in that particular department. One thing that I think really hurts the end goal when we think about someone who finds something or who needs to question something is that sometimes that information is brought forward when, for example, it's seen one time.
Mhm.
or you've not done any research yourself, but you're bringing up a problem, kind of expecting someone else to look into it and see, if it's against a policy or a guideline, things like that. So it should never be brought up because it's the opinion of a person. And I think that that's where, when you think about large departments, and we've talked about the politics of departments,
Yeah.
largely in this industry, there are a lot of women, which that can always cause a lot of clashing. Um,
I
that's
don't
always a fun
understand
thing.
why. Like, be a
It's
girl's
why my
girl.
circle is small. I can tell you
Yeah,
that.
I know. That's
Um,
why you're my sister and my best friend.
Yes. But so all of these things, we've got to talk about it because you and I are in external situations that's
Mhm.
totally different where we are now. And people who struggle with these things are typically on the inside, and they're
But
the
we
ones
have
getting all of the pressure.
Yeah, we have
Well,
also
we've been
been the
through it.
ones on the inside too.
Yes.
So, like, we're
Yes.
not just sitting here from our high horse saying, this is the problem and you just need to deal with it. We have been there. We have been the ones who have identified a breakdown in compliance and an issue and been brushed off and told, we don't want to deal with it.
Mhm.
So and so is just going to yell about it. Why bring it up? Nobody's going to listen.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the biggest things, even when I branched away from working internally for a hospital, when I was working in more of not a consultant yet, but working for companies that more so provided outsourced support
Hmm.
for production coding, you
Yeah.
know, pretty much the way that I would approach it and that I think people should approach it is do your research, go with your sources.
Hmm.
Don't just find it one time and ring that alarm bell. That is one of
Yeah.
the biggest things that disrupts an entire department because you could put your manager in a tizzy over everything. They look into it and then afterwards they say, well, how many times did you find it? Do you have examples? And there's one where that could just be
Yeah.
handled differently. So
Yeah.
come with all of that information because what that does is it helps give you it helps to give you that confidence. That's the word I'm looking for.
Hmm.
And in addition to that, that helps build your credibility with the
Yes.
organization that you're working with. Even if they don't want to hear what you're saying, you're bringing something to the table when you have those sources there. Now, if you're in a situation where all of that is done and you're still being told that you're going to be ignored, and I also had this conversation with a member of mine last week. They're going through something, and I said, you know what? It's easier for a phone call. Let's not do this in email. Let me call you quick. So we were talking through it. And, at the end of the day, you do have to make a decision if you're
Hmm.
a coder, an auditor, whatever position you're in, to say, okay, you may view that a different way, but this source right here from CMS, it's got to be an official source.
Yeah.
Do not bring an article or a clinical
Forum,
association. Yeah, a
a forum
forum, nothing.
post,
Yes.
nothing.
Yeah, look to CMS for the most part, unless there's a policy by the payer. But at some point, you may have to say, okay, well, you're seeing it this way. I'm seeing it this way. I'm not comfortable. Maybe I shouldn't be working those particular charges. Or maybe you need to
Mhm.
change my specialty so I'm not handling those claims. Try to remove yourself out of that if you can, if you're not in a place where you can get out of an organization if it is very toxic.
Yeah.
Now, with that being said, there are a lot of really good leaders in the industry. And,
Hmm.
we talk a lot about a culture of compliance, right? But as a part of that culture of compliance, a large part about running a good, successful team that is productive, that has quality work, is making sure that everybody does feel comfortable to ask questions. It
Hmm.
shouldn't be something where you have your morning huddles and somebody's always called out. So everyone just hovers and waits to see who's going to be called out that day for their little minor mistake that really didn't have a large
Yeah.
impact.
Or
I
asking
wonder
a
why I know
question.
about that. So,
Maybe because of the screenshot picture that a friend sent of me on a morning huddle where my face said it all.
I
Um,
know. Well, but and it's unfortunate because that is the type of leadership that
It
largely
is.
exists in the hospitals still in the established outpatient multi-specialty practices. And that may be the way it used to be, but it's not the way that it needs to continue. So
Yeah.
making sure everyone's comfortable to ask, to question. Questions are not a bad thing. I actually like it when my
Mhm.
clients come back to me. Let's say I send an answer because at that time I'm going through my list of emails and I just send off an answer. I don't send a link or a document with it with the source. It is not a bad thing when that client says to me, do you have the source for that? Or a member. I know
Mhm.
that's important in the membership. People need the source because I'm often the one helping support them going to their leadership to explain
Yeah.
things. So just think of it from those two different perspectives to try to change that picture a little bit and
Mhm.
poke and prod internally. You want to be challenged, you want to be questioned. It's not a bad thing. It's just
No.
making sure that everything is set as it should be. For example, I had a meeting with a client this morning and they had been through a Medicare audit and they were pretty worried about it. It was a TPE review, so it was E&M based, and they were pretty worried, but they got through it like a breeze. And they
Yeah.
said, I was talking with the practice administrator, and they said that is due to all of the work that we've put in. And that's
Mhm.
that's not just on my part, that's also on
No.
their part. They recognize the importance of compliance. They didn't freak out when we had conversations questioning workflow, questioning, they started to bill lab services and I said, "Okay, hold on. We just need to pause and talk about it. What's your process? Why am I
Mhm.
seeing these CPT codes? Where is your lab report?" All of those things. So come into it with an open mind and everybody's going to benefit from that.
Yeah. And one thing that I would like to add to the asking questions, always go into it not with a derogatory attitude of here, I am here to prove you wrong. Go into it with the attitude of I'm wanting to learn. I
Mhm,
want to understand why. I want to be part of the solution. I think that sometimes when we are, we talk a lot about toxic environments. And I think it's just because it's a reality for so many people. I think that can also get to us and we're like, aha, I got you. Like I
yeah,
have
oh yeah.
finally found something that I can throw in your face. If you're bringing that to somebody with that mindset, and that's your intent, might I recommend you just keep your mouth shut
Mhm,
because you're not going to accomplish anything. You have to demonstrate the change that you want to see within your leadership, and I know that that is so annoying. It is
mhm.
so annoying
It's hard to be
to
patient.
constantly do the right thing, constantly try to be understanding. You at a certain point that should be returned. Like, come on, folks, like
Mhm,
get with it. But if you are going from that mindset of I've got you, then
mhm,
don't even bother because that is not the purpose of what we do. And that's not going to have a positive outcome and it's not going to accomplish anything. Like, if you've got to take a minute to, step back, get over your frustrations before you say something, take that minute.
mhm,
But I have also found that when I express my level of concern in saying, I am not willing to submit this charge as it's documented, I am not comfortable. I think that gets attention when you're
mhm.
just
It
honest and
does.
you say this makes me uncomfortable. My name goes on this. Yes, ultimately the provider is the one who's responsible for this billing, but I am saying I am not comfortable with this, and that should cause anybody to take a pause and say, okay, why are you not comfortable? Because in the end, yes, we can have consequences for the
Mhm,
work that we do, but that is like one of those warning signs that somebody needs to review this, because maybe I'm going to use the word protection. We're trying to protect our providers. We're trying to make sure that things are going smoothly and correctly. And so if we just say, I'm not comfortable with this, and express your comfort level.
Mhm. Yep,
As
and
simple as that.
then it's
I
out in the open.
It is, and
And
that's not negative and it's not bad. It's just
right.
saying, this has given me enough of a red flag to say no.
Yep. Well, and so just to round this episode out here, look at it from the perspective that if you have a situation that you're curious about, you would like answers. So
Mhm.
whether that's you as someone who's coding and auditing and you're curious, or maybe from a management perspective, you're curious as to why somebody's taking the steps they're taking. Look at it from that perspective, question why it's being done that way. Try to not let things get to the point where it has been paid for years and then, new technology on the payer side stops that revenue and suddenly
Mhm.
that's when you're questioning it.
Mhm.
So think it through. I know it's hard in a busy practice. All of us have a lot going on, but try to carve out little moments to just tackling it a little bit at a
Mhm.
time or as things arise, as questions arise, whatever that may be. Look at breaking it down that way so it's more manageable and it doesn't feel like this big, mountain that you've got to, climb up and accomplish. So, all right. Well, we will go ahead and end it here. And we,
Oh, you know
oh,
what
wait,
we
that's right. The
didn't talk
challenge.
about? I
Yes.
see you trying to sneak out of that.
Yes. So Michelle's bringing up the updates on the challenge, but I have a good update. And speaking of tackling things a little bit at a time, that is what I have done since last week when I was struggling with that. So, looking into and those that didn't listen to the prior episodes, we were talking about things that could be done to help with like work-life balance or making sure that you are accomplishing what you want, for example, in your personal life, so that you do feel that you can
Mhm.
focus and get things done in your professional life. So, as a part of that, last week I was definitely struggling. And, overall, one thing I noticed is a disconnect in trying to create these habits, these good habits.
Mhm.
It can lead to getting sick or things like that. And that happened with me last week. I had a
Mhm.
lovely flare up of my diverticulosis, which is a new diagnosis that I was so happy to receive. And so I was down for a couple of days and I'm like, well, crap. And I think it was last night, maybe Michelle, you and I were talking about how, we're getting to that point in our lives where we have to make the decision. Do we want to do this and stick to the habits and do the things that make us feel better that we know is good for us? Or do we want to feel like crap and lay in bed all day? So
Yeah.
that's kind
And
of where it's at, and I've gotten a lot better. It's helping shift my mindset because that's always the hardest part.
yeah, and I feel like it has been such a struggle for me. So when we talk about things like goals and things like that and what we want to do in our personal life and to improve our health, I think that like for me personally, I've looked at it from a little bit of a different perspective. Like everybody's talk like always is always like, I'm gonna go on a diet. I'm gonna change my diet. Well, let's be honest. I've already done that. For people who don't know me prior to the podcast, like in the past couple of years, I've lost about 80 pounds. And I have fought for every single one of
Mhm.
those pounds, even with the help of things like GLP-1s and everything, just recently really starting to learn about some of the things that I have going on and how my body has to accept these things. So, like Stephanie, for example, she does her Krav Maga. I always say that wrong. She laughs because
You
I
were
call it
right.
Krav Maga.
You were
She
right.
does
It's
that
just a
several
weird
times a
word.
week. But for me, that would throw me into complete mayhem. So, like for me, things that I have been doing is like trying to get down a regimen of lymphatic drainage. And, even today, one thing that I will say, having somebody who is on your side, not somebody there to criticize you, but to like say, hey, just take a minute and do this together. And Stephanie did that this afternoon. Like this week, I have been really, really struggling with fatigue because I had to stop a couple of medications for some lab work that I have to do. And it is hitting me like a Mack truck. And today, Stephanie was like, let's stop for a minute, and she FaceTimed me and we did our little lymphatic drainage thing.
Yes, I
And believe
talked
it
her
or
through
not,
the 7 points, and I hope you
yes.
didn't do a screenshot or anything, that would be embarrassing.
Yeah, I should have,
No,
especially when it
we
came
don't
to
need
the one
blackmail.
region. I have plenty of that. Thank you very much. I have 40 years of blackmail. Um, but it's really helpful to have somebody to like say like when you're expressing that struggle, and it doesn't matter what that struggle is, to say, hey, let's just stop and take a minute. And instead of focusing on just like how terrible it is, let's try to do something to make it better.
Mhm.
And I think that that is so helpful. And that is actually what success in these things look like. So, I have wanted to focus on getting some reading in. I really enjoy reading. I enjoy immersing myself in those stories because I can just kind of like forget about everything. I feel like we have all this crap just constantly piled on us. I know, like, we're addicted to social media.
Yeah,
If you are somebody
trying to have better habits
who is
related to
not,
non-work time.
yes,
Yeah,
and it's so easy to fall into these traps of like instant gratification, and then you get those short bursts of like, "Ooh, this is nice. This is nice. We've laughed hysterically about this video here."
yeah.
Things like that. And breaking that cycle and just taking some time to um, you know, read a story that I've wanted to read, or even if it's something completely stupid and meaningless, has no value whatsoever. Like, to me, that has been nice, just to like sit outside in Florida. Our weather is becoming nicer. Believe it or not, we do get cold, unpleasant weather in Florida, but it is starting to warm up now. So it's nice to like sit outside for that 10 minutes a day and enjoy the
I've
book.
gotta work at that because I have a hard time when I'm focused in on something and I've gotta get something done, I have a hard time breaking away, so that's something I'm gonna be working on. I'm getting better now with a morning and an evening routine,
Hmm.
but it's not good to just sit there and, like, pound out work for 10 hours straight and not take care of your body or do different things, so
No.
that's
And
definitely something we've gotta focus on.
And I think that's something we're both guilty of, you more than me. I'm gonna call you out on that.
Oh, I'm
You
I'm
are
bad, I
more
know.
guilty of that than me, texting me at 10 o'clock at night when I'm in bed.
I know, I know.
I
Well,
mean,
I
I
think
can
we
choose
need
to
to
not
do
respond, but I do. But
I know. I think we need to do another episode too on all of this. Maybe we'll do touch points throughout the year on some
yeah,
things we're doing and tips, and it would be great too. So if you're listening and if you've stayed on for this episode for this long, sorry, this one went over. Um Tell us if there's something, you've been working on or you have a goal
yeah,
that you want to work on, or message us on LinkedIn if you don't want to put it out there
yeah,
publicly, but that would be fun to just kind of get some conversation going around that because it's definitely needed. There's a lot of heaviness in the world and just day to day and the workload that we're flooded with. It can be
yeah.
heavy. So,
Various reasons
yes.
cause
Yeah.
these stresses and things. And one thing that I've kind of recently let go of is like public perception of what is cool to do with
Mhm.
my time. And if it brings you joy, who cares?
Right.
Like, You know what I
Just do
mean?
it.
Like, who cares if it's the popular book genre to be reading? We all know romantasy right now is like blowing up, and that is everybody's identity. I am guilty of this, but I mean, I
Well,
really enjoy it.
I even you out because I go more towards
I'm a
thriller and
nerd.
horror, so
Yeah, and then you make me read these books and I'm driving along. I just remember years ago I'm driving on the highway at night and the book starts. It was a dark night on a deserted road. I'm like,
yeah, and there you are in the woods.
every road in New York is deserted where we live,
I know.
you know. But,
I know.
find what makes you happy. Like if it's a hobby that is not per se cool in
Yeah, just
somebody
do it.
else's standards, it's cool to you.
Yeah,
So who
and
cares?
explore. Try new things. That's something
Eh,
too on the weekends.
yeah,
Try new things. If it looks like it interests you, try it. That's how you find what works for you.
that is
But
something I have to improve on, I will say,
yes,
trying new things.
yes.
But it will not be hiking.
I know. I know. All right. So we're going to end out the episode here for today. So hopefully there's some takeaways. So, takeaways in your professional life. Make sure you're looking at what you've been doing, making sure that you're not just waiting for that denial to have you question things that are going on. Always have those touch points.
Mhm.
And then in your personal life, I definitely would love to see what some of you are doing. So, wherever
Mhm.
you follow us, reach out, comment. It'll be nice to interact that way a little bit and see how people are trying to break up the long weeks.
Yeah.
So, all right. I hope everybody has a good rest of this week, and we will see you back next week.